So what do we understand by CSS selectors? All right, so selectors are used to find or select the HTML element you want to style. That is, in simple terms, what selectors are. So we have different types of selectors that we can use to actually select our HTML elements. So the first one we have is the ID selector. We also have the class selector, we have the element selector, we have the star selector, we also have the pseudo classes. All right, so let's take each one one after the other and see how we can make use of it. All right, so we have the selector.html document, and I will link up a CSS file. So create an external CSS file. So that will be we call that selector. .css. Okay, your CSS file can take any name. All right, so just give it a name, and you can follow link to create a file, or you can create a file and link it up directly. All right, so once you've created your file, let's take a look at selectors. So selectors, like we said, are of different types. All right, we have different types of selectors, and we use it to select HTML elements we want to style. Alright, so the first one we have is the ID selector. So the ID selector targets a specific HTML element by its unique ID attribute. Alright, so IDs are unique, so we have to call up what the ID attribute and give it what a name. Alright, all specific ID attribute has a name, so we have to name our ID. So I'm going to name this let's say title. All right, so whatever name you give your ID depends on you. So you have IDs are unique, meaning you can only have one ID name, all right, in that particular element. Okay, so once you add the name of your ID, you have to call it up on your CSS using the hash character. So IDs are defined using the hash character. All right, so first of all, give your ID a name. All right, then call it up on your CSS using the hash character. So once you call it up on your CSS, you can specify your CSS property and your value. All right, so I can simply add, let's say background here, let's say pink. All right, then we set our color to be black. Okay, so all IDs are unique, and IDs are specified using the hash character. All right, so the second type of selectors we have is the class selector. Now this class selector targets HTML elements with a specific class attribute. All right, so we have to call up the class and also give our attributes class a name. All right, so I can call this description as my class name. All right, so your class can also have any name you decide to give it. All right, you can give your class that name, and classes are defined using a dot. All right, so once you call up that dot, you can call up your class name right beside that character. All right, so which is what description, then your curly braces. All right, then you can add whatever CSS property and value you wish to add. All right, so the difference between your class and your ID is that it is unique. All right, so your class can have multiple class names. Okay, your class can have multiple class names, so I can still decide to give my an extra class name of let's say tests. All right, then call it up on our CSS using what a single dot and the test class word. Okay, so but IDs can also only take just a single name. You cannot give ID multiple ID names. All right, so that is why they are unique. Now your IDs can be reusable. All right, meaning I can take my ID here and also add it here. All right, so whatever property I added on this element will also be reflected on this element. All right, same applies with my class. I can still call up a class called description. All right, right here, and whatever class or whatever CSS property we apply within this description curly braces also reflects on this particular HTML element. All right, so we can use our ID names and our class names multiple times in different elements if what we want to achieve is kind of similar. All right, so but when it comes to the naming convention, your ID only gets per element just one name, and your class can take several names. All right, you can add as many names as possible. All right, depending on what you want to style. All right, so your class can have several names, your ID can have just a single name. All right, now what about the element selector? Now the element selector allows us to select HTML elements directly. Okay, so we are selecting HTML elements directly. And how do we do that? By simply calling up that particular HTML element. Now the disadvantage of using the element selector is that if you have more than that one element in that whole page, whatever you add as your property and value will affect those other elements. For example, we have an anchor tag here. We also have an anchor tag here. So when I apply, let's say, text decoration, none, and color red. Okay, so let's try that out. So let's go live on that. So you can see that when we applied the background color of red, right? When we applied background color rather of red, it affected this anchor tag and also affected this anchor tag. So basically, when you're using the element selector, you may want to use it for, let's say, general style. All right. But what if we wanted to add a whole different style to this anchor tag, and we actually called it up using this method? Right? You can see that when you call up the element selector directly, it's going to affect any other element with that same name. All right, it's going to affect every other element with that same name. So that is how the element selector works. So when you are actually using this element selector, you can combine it using what? The CSS combinator method, which we are going to talk about in our next section. All right, so what of the universal style selector? All right, the style selector actually targets all the visual parts of the HTML elements used for general style. So that means we can use the style selector for general style. So the style selector is represented using the star character. All right. So once you call up the star character, you can specify any general style you want to add. All right. So you can add like a general font size or a general font family, a general background. Okay. So I can call up, let's say, font size of 50 pixels. All right. So it's going to affect all the visual parts of your page. All right. So when it comes to adding general style, you can make use of your universal style selector, which is your what? The general style selector. All right. So I'm going to remove this, yeah, because we don't really want our font size to be 50 pixels. Okay. So the last selector we have is the pseudo class selector. All right. Now, the pseudo class selector actually targets elements based on their state or position in that element. So that means the pseudocode selector targets elements based on their state. So an HTML element can have different states based on a user interaction. For example, I can call up the overstate of an anchor tag by using what? The colon. So we have so many pseudocode classes out there that you can try out. All right. So we can call up what? The overstate. And the overstate is when a user actually places their cursor, all right, on an element. So we can change the effect, all right. So we can say background black, color white, all right. So when you try that out, you can see that when you override, the state actually changes. So the pseudocode is actually used to what? Change or modify the state of an element, or based on the position in which that element occupies. Alright, so when we also get to what? The CSS combinator in our next section tutorial, alright, we'll look at how we can use the CSS combinator method to combine our CSS element selectors, alright, in order to achieve the proposed result that we need.